Peckford, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're about the same age. I was born in 1944. You were born in 1942, which makes you uniquely qualified to, I think, answer this question. Is 70 the new 50?
Yeah, by far. I've been telling people the last few days, I feel 50. No question about it. And it is. There's no question. 70 is the new 50. And let's hope that when I get 80 and so on. My mother passed away this year. She was 97. And I have a number of aunts that were 98 and 99, and the rest were in their late 80s. So I got a little bit of genetics on my side. So for me, there's no question. I'm 50.
And while you might have retired from politics, you haven't retired.
No. I still get up every morning, got the computer on before I got my coffee at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And I'm involved in education out west with a private university, of which I'm chancellor, and on their academic council. So I'm into the policy area of international education, mainly. And I'm still involved, ever since my days in Springdale, when I was a high school teacher, I'm still involved in the mining business. And I got that from my days in Springdale, because Springdale always had a number of drilling companies, diamond drilling companies, and we had 3 mines out there when I got elected first in Green Bay. So I'm involved in mining, and I'm still involved in politics. So there you go. You know, I got 3 strings to my bow still, and between the 3 of them, I'll tell you, every morning there's some kind of a curve comes at you that you got to get up and get at.
But snow is not a part of your life anymore, correct?
You know, snow is not part of my life anymore. But I live overlooking Georgia Strait. I can see the coast mountains. But the big thing is, I've got about 50 trees on my lot, Douglas fir and cedar. So between the trees and looking out every morning, I can, out of my bedroom window, I can see the water. And it's salt water. So when I can smell the salt and the trees are around me, I'm pretty much home.
And you do come back home a lot. I know that. Let me ask you this. How has Newfoundland of your childhood changed?
Changed a lot, because you might remember back in the 80s, I was the Lone Ranger on the railway. I was born in Whitburn, which was a railway town, really. That was the first stop out of St. John. Well, they stopped at Avondale and so on, but it was a bigger stop because of Trinity Bay fed into Whitburn. So I grew up with the train. My first 9 years. And I remember, you know, running the railway tracks. I think I got it in my book. So that was a part of my early upbringing. We then went to Marystown.
And of course, there's no train left in Newfoundland. That's
I know.
The point, yeah.
I know, that's what and I negotiated that. It was about a 1.2 billion, which I didn't want to do. That's a good story, by the way. It's not in my book, because I had advice that I couldn't win that if I took it to court. But we took that big legal opinion and threw it away. And every argument we made with the feds was that we don't want to take you to court because we know we'll win. And that's how we got the $1.2 billion for it. And everybody said, you know, you got $1 billion too much. But that was a really good negotiation, I'll say. Anyway, and we moved to Marystown. And Marystown didn't have anything at that time. 1,000 people, 1,100 people. All the work was in Grand Bank and Fortune and the fish plants there. And Marystown had no fish plant, had nothing, didn't have the shipyard, and there was nothing there. And we walked a couple of miles to school, and there was only a few cars in the community, 1951, so from 42 to 51, say.
Gravel roads? Gravel roads?
Yeah, all gravel. Didn't know what pavement was.
No Trans-Canada Highway across the island?
No, nothing. As a matter of fact, the 90 miles from Goobies down to Marystown, I tell a story in my book. We were supposed to get off at Goobies, and my father was supposed to come and greet us in a car and take us down to Goobies on the gravel road. Well, it was a vicious snowstorm. He couldn't. He got caught in snow halfway on the gravel road from Goobies to Marystown in 1951. We stayed there overnight, and somebody took us in, a mother and 5 squealing children, and we had to come back to St. John's. We ended up getting the train to Argentia and taking the Northern Ranger, no, the Barhaven, the old coastal boat, across Placentia Bay to Marystown. We got there Christmas Eve in the snowstorm with all of us sick down in the hole of the ship. sick as dogs. Mother was the only one who wasn't sick. And we were, I recount a little bit in my book, we were pretty desperate. 6 people, let me tell you. So I lived in Marystown then from up until grade 9, up until high school. And I went to common school. We were only Protestants in the community. And it was one of the best experiences of my whole life. I went to the school there, Sisters of Mercy. And they were unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. From our recitations and our music to the rigor of our studies, nothing better. Don't think it was possible for me to be anywhere in the world and get a better education than I got in Marystown. And I remember it extremely fondly. We moved then in 56, 57 to Lewisport. And Lewisport, compared to Marystown, was like going from St. John's to Montreal almost. It was a big difference, right? They had the coastal boats. It was a terminus for a lot of the coastal boats going north and going to Labrador, and so there was lots of activity and buzz, and lots of entrepreneurship around, a lot of small businesses and nice new schools. And we didn't know where we were first. I saw television for the first time when I was 12 or 13 years old. We did all of those school years by lead and lamp. We didn't have electricity.
Wood stoves? Wood stoves?
No,
for
we
heat?
had oil heat.
Okay.
Yeah, we had oil heat. In school we had wood stove. We all brought splits and chunks of wood to get the stove going in the morning. And the week that you had the stove, so called, you had to get in early, because that room had to be warm when everybody else came in, especially when the teacher came. You didn't want the teacher to be cold, because she'd be cranky, and you didn't want her to be cranky. So you got in early and you got that stove going. Of course, by recess time, you were sweating, and the thing never cooled down till about 5 o'clock in the evening when you went home. And it was a little bucket of cold there sometimes to throw on the wood, to keep it simmering better. But yeah, they were great days. And we just more or less joined the Catholic Church in the sense that my father told Sister Superior, I want them to be treated exactly like every other kid. Well, no, we've already made arrangements for them to leave the room when we do our prayers, because we do a lot of prayers. Of course, Protestants are not used to a lot of prayers like that. And Father said, no. You don't do that for my children. My children, we have chose to come here. I have chose to come here, and my family, therefore, has chose to come here. And we're going to your school. So when in Rome, we do as the Romans do, as Father's approach. Besides which, Father's a very open-minded fellow. Well, one of the best fathers you could ever have in the whole world. My father was one of my heroes. And so he told them, no, I want them to be there, and I want them to learn your prayers. So we learned all the prayers, and within 2 months we had them all memorized, and we joined in with all the prayers, and we went to the church, the Stations of the Cross, and all the rest of it, did the whole thing, and enjoyed every minute of it. And the sisters were just overjoyed. There was no new adjustment to do for these kids, and they quickly realized that if we were punished, it was no good for us to go home and say anything to Father and Mother, because the sisters were always right and we were always wrong. That was the end of the story. And we all knew that. We knew that it was osmosis. Nobody told us that. But at the time I was 5 or 6, we knew what the rules were. They didn't have to be plastered on the wall anywhere in the house. We knew what the rules were, and the rules were strict. You could speak up and say your piece and all that. But there was a time to go to bed, and there was a time to do homework, and there was a time to do this, and there was a time to do that. That was it. Outside of that, you had a fair amount of freedom, but there was a framework, and so that's how I was raised. So when we got to Lewisport, it was totally different. So I went to high school there, and I was very different and very interesting as well. And hearing the trains shunting every night and stuff. We lived in 2 or 3 different houses there.
Your father, his work was moving you around the province, correct?
Well, he was a social worker, so he was stationed at different places, right? So that was the reason for that. Now, while I was in Whitburn, when I got born in Whitburn in Markland, before Confederation, he was in the Ranger Force, the old police force in Newfoundland. And he became a staff sergeant and a trainer, and the training school was in Whitburn. But he was born down here, close to where we are right now. He was born there in the Battery, to Joe Peckford, and Joe always and my grandmother insisted that all the children were going to go to school to the end, and then hopefully do some post-grad work. He did some business course somewhere downtown here with some private school at the time.
And we should maybe tell our viewers that we're visiting in downtown St. John's in the Christina Parker Art Gallery right on the waterfront.
We're
So
right
when
here
you
on
talk
the
about the harbor being over here, it's just right there.
The harbor's right here, and we're very close to the Terry Fox Memorial, and it's that ground which one time was water, and in which was my father's wharf, grandfather's wharf, that he fished from for 50 years.
When you get ready to go to Memorial University, is this the first time you will have lived away from home?
Yes.
And you would have been 17?
Yes.
In a moment, I'm sure you're going to talk about how Newfoundland has changed in huge ways. But what you describe is kind of almost a nostalgic childhood in rural Newfoundland. I would argue that in rural Newfoundland now, it hasn't maybe prospered in the same way. And
couldn't agree more.
In some ways, rural Newfoundland's in
It's
a very
gone back.
serious, almost tragic decline because
It is. No question. In my book,
it was bad before.
In my book, I deal with that extensively, and I tell the whole book is laced with stories of rural Newfoundland. That's where I got all my inspiration. That's where I got all my strength. That's where I got all my education, formal, and more importantly, informally. My education was in the 27-foot boat when I was 19 years old in Mary's Harbour, Labrador, and in Englee on the Northern Peninsula, and in Lassie in Notre Dame Bay. That's where I got my real education. So yeah, you hit a very sensitive chord with me. And as you know, I fought that fisheries thing pretty tough for a long, long while. And the dichotomy now, the difference between the Avalon Peninsula, St. John's, and the rest of the provinces is perhaps one of the negative outcomes of the way our prosperity developed as a result of the Atlantic Accord, for which I have no alternative but to be proud. But there has to be a footnote, and it has to be a fairly significant footnote to it. And we are under, I don't think people realize that we have, in my view, an inherent solemn obligation. And that's not clear here right now. We have an inherent solemn obligation. And I feel it very strongly because of what we just talked about, and there's quite a few people in the St. John's region who don't belong here in the sense that they were born in rural Newfoundland. But we've got to do something about that. We've got to do something about that.
So when the kids in rural Newfoundland might have high-speed internet, but they're not very many kids in rural Newfoundland anymore.
That's right.
And how you turn that around
is a monumental task, but it starts with the fishery, and it ends with the fishery.
Let me ask you about, still looking backwards a bit.
Yes.
Back in 1983, you wrote a book about the past,
Yes,
the present, the future,
Yes.
personal perspective. And in it, you made the observation that something deep in the psyche of Newfoundlanders, there's a sense of inadequacy.
Yes.
Can you tell me what you meant and where you think what that sense of inadequacy may be now?
Yeah, I think for a lot of Newfoundlanders now, a lot of them would say that we have overcome that. That I always thought years ago we had to be twice as good to be equal when we talked to the rest of Canada, right? And we somehow, because of our language, we even did it to ourselves. I tell a story about me going to Memorial, and the first thing I had to do, because I came from outside the overpass, was take a speech test. And I went in to take the speech test. This is how it manifests itself, but I'll come back to the core point, and I won't be very long. But this is a really good example of how we did it to ourselves. And I say that in that first book as well. It was others and it was with ourselves. We conspired with ourselves too. So, it gets complex. So I wouldn't sit down even. I was too contrary to sit down in the room with the two professors to read a prose passage to determine whether in fact I had to take speech or not. So I stood up sort of in defiance, right, as a physical defiant act, and said I had something that I wanted to read. I didn't want to read what they had there for me to read. And they said, well, what do you want to read? And I said, I want to recite Tennyson's Ulysses. So I looked at them and stood at attention and said, "A little prophet's that an idle king by the still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife." And so I go on for another couple of phraseology, and they look at me and "Stop, you can go now." I saw it one day when I was about 12 years old, when my friend in Marystown, his house wasn't very far from school. My house was a long way, so we stayed in for dinner, for lunch. We couldn't go home. It was too far to walk to get back in time for the afternoon. So we'd bring a lunch. But his house was close enough for us to go home. So he invited me home to his house one day for dinner, for lunch. And so we were sitting down having lunch, and I was always the type looking around to see what was going on new in the community, which is very little. But just down the hill from where the house was a man building a new building. It looked like it was going to be a business of some sort. And this was, it was quite something. You didn't see too many new buildings going up. So I said to his mother, as I was sitting down at the table, "Mrs., did you see Mr. whatever his name was down here, Mr. Smith? He's building a new building. I think he's going to start a business or something, didn't he?" She said, "That's George." She said, "That's Aunt Maggie's son. She was never any good, and he'll never be any good." And we always tend to eat our own a little bit, and that's hurt us a bit. But there has been a current, nevertheless, I think, which I sort of tried to articulate in the book, of that sort of inferior complex or inadequacy or whatever, because of our speech, because of the nature of our history, which I never had it. I was always rebelling against anybody who talked like that, right? And I never ever felt, as most people know me at all, very not having confidence wasn't part of my personality. And it was just the opposite of anything. And so that stuck in me for a long, long time. It stuck in me. And so like that example of that friend, that example of the speech test, that example of first time I went to Labrador as a social worker and went into the lady's house. This happened all over rural Newfoundland at the time. Sometimes it was a boarding house, or I was just going to stay there overnight, getting in out of the little boat or whatever. And so they were rushing around to make some, the Mounties in town, social workers in town, or the priests or ministers in town, right? So you really got to, put on airs a little bit, right, and clean up the place. But the first thing they'd all say to you, the missus would say, "Now, sir, what would you like to eat? I got a tin of bully beef here." Her husband had just come in with the most absolutely fantastic codfish or mackerel that you ever saw in your life, fresh right out of the friggin' water. And she's going to serve me this bloody old tin of bully beef, and I'd say, "Missus, you better throw that away. As long as I'm here, I'm never going to put that to my lips. Where is the fish?" Because she viewed the bully beef as being superior to the fish.
You made a reference to Newfoundland history that takes my mind back to something else you said in '83 when you published the book. And that was, in your view, Newfoundland's history is one of, I think I remember it correctly, colonialism, exploitation, subjugation.
Yes. And I repeat that in the preface to my new book, in the sense that some commentators and writers have accused me of just sort of building off Proust in the sense and just looking at the struggles. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've got to inform you that that's how I perceive our history largely. There are a few golden exceptions that we can talk about, and that's the dispatch of 1855 when Newfoundlanders just rose up and said, "We're not amending that French shore fishing treaty to give the French even more fishing rights here." And we sent the Prime Minister and a couple of people over and got Barucci, whatever his name was in England, who was the Foreign Secretary, to scrap that deal, and also, more importantly, to say the following. The statement's still there today. In future, there will be no decisions made, fundamental decisions made about Newfoundland and its economy without the approval of the Parliament of Newfoundland. I wish a lot of people would remember that one. But yeah, and my own personal experience as a social worker, this is the thing, some of the writers who've written about this I don't think have ever been to rural Newfoundland. They certainly haven't been to rural Newfoundland in 1961 when I was in Croke, when the guy comes down on the wharf at about 7 o'clock in the morning so nobody would see him, and he tells me he doesn't know why he's there, but that he's got 3 kids and he can't feed them because the ice is in, he can't get his nets out in the water, and he's never had his name on the government books, and starts to cry, and I take $35 in my pocket and give it to him, put it in his hand, with him resisting. Said, here it is, and the ice will be out in a week or 2, and just might tie you over. He didn't want to go to the merchant because he was going to have to go from free salt anyway when he went fishing, and he didn't want to be indebted to the merchant. And he wasn't then indebted, and he didn't intend to be indebted. And so I gave him $35 and said, I'll never see you again, I'll never be here anymore, and so you just go on and you forget about it. I'll live without getting this $35 back. 3 weeks later, I got a money order in Angley for $35.
In the time we have left, I want to come forward and talk about some very good things that have happened in Newfoundland and Labrador. But I just want to ask you one question. The word Newfie has kind of fallen out of favor, certainly in Newfoundland. Some people think it's an insulting expression. Some people don't. Where are you on that?
Haven't got a problem with it at all.
Okay.
Haven't got a problem with it at all.
Never experienced somebody calling you a Newfie in a derogatory way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I come back just as fast as they say it. I'm proud as punch that you called me a Newfie. I'm as proud as punch. We have a deep and enduring history. A lot of it, like a lot of places, we've had our disasters and we've had our problem. But I tell you right now, when I think of my grandfather and my great-grandfather, I'm some proud to be called a Newfie. So that's the end of that.
You must be proud of the progress that you see when you come to St. John's now, which is
phenomenal.
I've lived here long enough to know when things weren't great. Things are pretty good now.
Yeah, they are.
Almost all of it flowing from offshore resources,
Just about all of it.
Labrador mineral exploration.
Yeah, I just looked it up before we did this interview. From 2005 to 2010, the granddaddy, which was the Atlantic Accord, 1985, because we had in there 3 royalty streams for Hibernia. We're into that 3rd royalty stream, which is super royalty. When they started, everything
Some
was paid
people thought
off.
it would never arrive.
I know. But guess what? I told somebody the other day, forgot. You know, it took a long while. They said, Brian, I said, no, it didn't. You're wrong. What do you mean by a long while, sir? And he says, well, you know, gee, it took a lot. Well, I said, from the time Hibernia was discovered, 79, it took until 97 for oil to flow, physically, to negotiate the deal that we did, the Hibernia Statements of Principles before I left office in 89. But I said then, from the time oil flowed in 97, we became a half province in 2007, 10 years. It was just a decade. And from 2005 to 2010, that old accord, if you will, but it's the main accord, everything else was amended from the accord, $2 billion cash. In addition to the royalties, because we're being treated the same as on land, which is in the accord. That's in addition to all the royalties, you know, so there's billions of dollars. 642 million out of that 85 accord in 2010 alone. Cash. So yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, there are only 4 provinces that have provinces now: BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland. We're subsidizing Ontario right now. You got to read my book because I give 4 quotes from the Globe and Mail.
You look like you really enjoy saying that.
Hibernia, they said in a headline, and never ever amended it since. I've gone to their archives, tried to find it, asked the archivists in the Globe and Mail to tell me where they changed this. Hibernia was on Economics 101. Another headline about 2 weeks later, stop it now. So yeah, I mean, those of us who soldiered on that thing, I did a poll, right, when the feds got Nova Scotia to sign a lesser deal, and they came down and did a big blitz, and I did a poll, and the poll said, and I didn't show it to cabinet, I broke every rule in the book and didn't show it to anybody except about 2 people. One might have been Frank Ryan, my campaign manager for years, and good friend. It said, Brian, you fought the good fight. We put a whole bunch of, you know, different things in there. And the essential part was, you fought the good fight. You did what you could. Sign. I threw it away. Said, never. I'm not going to sign until I get some say. And revenues as if it was on land. And thankfully for Brian Mulrooney, by the way, we got it by the skin of our teeth. This was with all the preparation we did, with Cabot Martin and Steve Millins and Cy Abrys and Ron Penny's and Dave Vardy's and Hal Stanley's and all of the wonderful people I had working for me and the loyalty and the commitment that those men had, all of whom could have went out and doubled their salary any day of the week. Right? Well, you know a lot of these people, and they could have easily. They're brilliant people, but devoted Newfoundlanders for all that work. It was by the skin of our teeth that the right person was in the right place at the right time to be able to say, I'll do this, even though he was armed with a Supreme Court of Canada decision which said, I own this completely, I don't have to give you a damn thing. Someday that will, hopefully through my book and through other historical research that will be done, that will be seen for what it is. So yeah, I'm, like many Newfoundlanders, pretty proud of what we've been able to accomplish, but the footnote always has to be, it ain't finished yet.
In just the couple of minutes we have left, I would think you must be especially proud when you go onto the campus of Memorial University, where they're trying to double the number of engineers that are graduating, where you go onto the campus of the Marine Institute, where all these kids are coming out of that place with marine skills and walking into an industry that's just grabbing them up as fast as they can.
And you know what?
There's jobs here now.
You would never believe how many come by and say thank you. You would not believe how many came by last night to chapters from a lecture I gave the day before yesterday at Memorial. These kids walked into the door of chapters last night, 22-year-olds. Beeline to the desk. I heard you this morning. I want your book now. You know. Yeah.
These kids they weren't even born when
they
you were
weren't
in
even
power.
born. But they're at some university, they're at a learning institution, and they're beginning to do some research, and they know from whence it came, which is wonderful to see, and bright, and we all know. I mean, it's just like your children and your son that you told me about, who's at the Marine Institute. There it is. And when I go to Calgary, I went to Calgary one time, only a few years ago, and one of the oil companies, I went up on the 8th or 10th floor, and the guy took me in, and he had been an old guy negotiating on the other side. Heard I was in Calgary, wanted to meet me again, for old time's sake, and bring me to the office. I don't know if it was Chevron or one of them. Anyway, he brings me up to the office, and I think there were 17 people on that floor. 13 were Newfoundlanders. And they all got together in the boardroom to say hello to me and thank me.
The last time you used to go up, not the last time, but I remember, I'm just going to finish now, but I recall you telling the story in the campaign trail. You went out to Alberta and you said, so we're going to get jobs, you can come home. Now you're going out there. And that's
Absolutely.
Great. That's great.
Yeah.
You've had a good run, and I'm looking forward to reading your book, and I appreciate you taking time to talk about your life with us this morning.
I'm more than appreciative that you took the time for us to talk about this.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, too.